everyone, and welcome to the second party. I'm here with my wife today, and we're glad you decided to stick around for the second party. We wanted to talk a bit about exactly that, the second party, and the idea behind it. In the first episode, we talked about trying to dive deeper into topics, and one of the first times that my wife and I experienced this together was during our time up at college. Everyone's got some great college stories, and one of the best nights of our whole college experience, I think, was a time where we just hung out with a couple of other couple friends.
And this was a group of friends that we had met at college, and we were invited to hang out and have a dinner with some of these people, and it was really a group of couples, actually.
Yeah.
And one of them was my roommate. So, I mean, we knew my roommate and her fiance at the time. But there was this other couple that was invited, and we'll call them Sam and Emily.
Yeah.
Sam and Emily were invited. We had not met this Sam and Emily before,
well,
except maybe in passing.
We knew Sam a bit, and
we knew who they were.
Yeah, we knew who they were.
But we were not, close with them at all. We had never really sat down and talked with them before.
Not in depth, no.
And we all got together, and we had a dinner together, and it was a normal dinner time, and
yeah, like how most get-togethers go, just kind of standard conversation, doing some cooking, hanging out,
right.
Ate for a bit, and then
there's that time when it's like, when you're at a dinner party, and it's like, well, okay,
it's okay to leave.
Yeah, it's okay to leave, but okay, we're sitting at the table, we're eating dinner, we're done eating dinner,
yeah,
and there's this weird kind of everyone's eyeing each other, what's going on, are we done?
Are we
do
gonna
we
bounce?
leave?
Yeah.
Are we gonna move over to the couches?
Yeah.
Do I have to keep sitting in this uncomfortable dining chair?
Yeah, what are we? That's always the question.
What are we doing here?
Is it going to get more comfortable in seating arrangements?
So,
yeah.
We made it to couch phase, basically, I should say.
It's a big step.
We made it past the dinner table, and there was also a point, I think, a couple of the people had to leave, but Sam and Emily, they stayed.
Yeah, they hung out along with one or two other folks. Yeah. Yeah,
and we just were talking. We all sat down on the couches. We got comfortable, and we just started talking. And before we knew it, it was 11 o'clock, and we were talking about things that were making people cry.
Well,
before we knew it.
I think what really started happening is we sat down on the couches, and after, I don't know, maybe a minute or two of getting acclimated to some new environment, I asked a couple highly pointed questions.
As you do.
As I tend to, yes. And, I mean, we kind of talked about this, touched on in the first podcast episode, but just that light up that you see in people's eyes, something clicked, we're ready to dive into the deep end here and really see what this is all about.
And I think for whatever reason, Emily really latched onto this, and she just, I mean, she was full in talking about her deepest fears, very serious things that we were talking about. And I think it was because of, I don't know, maybe some questions that you had asked about them and their relationship or something. Yeah. Very, not overly obtrusive questions by any means, but just some some questions.
Not prying necessarily, but
that were a little bit more. I think part of what it was she had grown up Catholic, and he was not Catholic. He
grew up Protestant.
Protestant. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think the question you asked was tell me about your Catholic upbringing. And well, we were talking about that, and
I mean, I think a lot of the times the pointed questions are just, I mean, to a degree it's asking what I'm interested in, but when I'm asking that question, it's an actual question. I'm not looking for a specific answer. I'm looking for what that person has experienced, and she seemed very, very open with it, and then that quickly kind of devolved or morphed into like familial differences, because obviously upbringing in terms of faith, even if it's a denominational issue, I think, it ultimately kind of devolved into other types of differences, and how those would be worked out. And I hesitate to say it was like a therapy session, because I think that word sometimes gets this connotation of like it's all about one party. But I felt like, and maybe just generally speaking, when you get into like these very deep, pointed conversations where you're really getting at the core of certain things and trying to talk it out and work things out, I think really what ends up happening is it's almost like this mutual therapy session, or this mutual exploration of the intellectual world, and that's really what we ended up getting into. A lot of.
Well, I remember talking about, she was sharing some of her concerns about the differences they had, and how to navigate through that into a marriage, which is something that they were looking to in the future. And I remember us at that same point in life, like in that conversation, thinking about that, and that kind of forced me to think about, well, okay, what are some of those things that we have had to struggle through or are struggling through too?
Yeah.
And it forced me to think about that critically for myself. And I think not only did we talk about those things as it related to her, but I found out that it actually related to me or to us too. And we were able to connect on that with them and share mutual experiences. And it was interesting because we had never said more than a few words to one of them, maybe, before this night. Like,
just kind of passing conversation.
We were up, and literally, I think they left at around 4 a.m. And we talked, like, this is not even an exaggeration, for like 7 or 8 hours with this couple.
Just straight.
We just talked, and it was one of the best nights of college, I think, at least for me.
Yeah.
And this couple turned into, like, we felt like they were close friends of ours by the end of that time.
After one night,
Right.
Yeah.
And it was just really interesting, and there was something so, like, satisfactory and fulfilling about just being able to connect with someone like that and go into those types of deep conversation, that it's like there is this longing deep within you, I think, for that. And maybe you can speak to this more, but where this idea of the second party comes from is, there was the first party, and that was the dinner, right? That was when everyone was there.
Yeah, that's hanging out in the kitchen. That's
hanging out,
making the dinner. That's
how's school
that's the
going?
Surface level kind of conversation, getting up to date with people.
What's your life like?
Yeah.
What major are you? Right?
The classic college question. Yeah.
Yeah, and then after that, if you stay long enough, there's a second party that happens, and it almost feels like a completely different party.
Yeah, I mean,
that you've entered into.
This was something definitely experienced, and something that I had observed a number of times in my life. And we were kind of talking about this in the beginning, in the first episode, when I was talking over some of the conversations that I had with people, and to a degree that was like a micro second party with one or two people. I think the true second party occurs, and this is part of the name scheme, was developed out of the intro to Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, written by Norman Dodge. And there have been a number of instances where something like that kind of happens, and I think a lot of people most of the time bow out between the first party, where it's more surface level, hangout, general talk, and what we're kind of calling the second party. So part of the reason that we named the podcast that is we want to get right into that deep end of things, those deep conversations. Let's have the actual discussions about things. Let's really dive in, and I think and
explore ideas.
Yeah, to explore ideas, to really get a better understanding of things. I mean, how one thinks, and we were kind of talking about this on the previous episode as well, but how one thinks oftentimes is correlated with discussions with people. You learn things by talking about ideas, bouncing them off of someone else, seeing how they're responding. Somebody else can tell you things that you don't know with perspectives that you've not heard of before. And I felt like I experienced that a lot when we were talking with Sam and Emily, especially. Like there were certain things where like that they would mention like a concern or something that they were working on getting through, and sometimes that's something that you've worked through, but other times it's something that you've not yet addressed, or maybe you worked through it at some point, but things have evolved in your relationship since then. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of those discussions are predicated on people being vulnerable, people being truthful, people being open,
and people willing to engage and to go deeper and to think about things and to ponder ideas, and think past just the immediate surface level. Mm-hmm. And I think most people are willing to do that. I think they are, and I think most people do have a desire for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think sadly, a lot of the discussions that we have nowadays, whether that be at a familial dinner or a hangout with friends, I think too often we sit in that kind of first party area because we don't want to be vulnerable, to open ourselves up. We don't want to confront that which maybe we've turned a blind eye to in the past. And I think part of what we want to do and what we were doing with Sam and Emily there was confronting some of those things, being honest, being open, and being willing to be wrong, right? Mm-hmm. Being able to say like, yeah, I don't know about this, but here's what I'm thinking. I can think of so many times where at the time, obviously we were in college, so it's early 20s, but the things that we were talking about were very serious issues, right? It's how are we going to navigate relationships with extended family? How are we going to navigate having kids? How are we going to negotiate having a household together? What are people's roles going to be? What are people's tasks going to be? How are people wanting to receive love? And how do we approach different things in life when we have, maybe sometimes fundamental differences in beliefs, and how can we rectify that? How can we change or challenge those fundamental beliefs? Or how can we address how they're exemplified, how they're manifested in actual action?
So I think like what you're looking for, and this is really like an open invitation, I think, is you want a place where you can talk about ideas you have and where people can come and they can add to them, they can try to build on the ideas, mm-hmm. or they can try to provide counterpoints to the ideas. Like, let's refine these ideas. Like, I think what you're looking for is you're looking for that place, that environment where you can put ideas out there and they can be challenged and they can be refined.
Yeah.
Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's really what you, I think, are hoping that this can be.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great summary. I think the analogy that I always use is when I'm having a discussion or I have some idea, I kind of think about it as if I'm erecting a tower. And that tower is that idea that I'm positing. And my goal is obviously to have that tower stand. But I think to have a strong tower, to have that strong idea, you need to almost like dissociate and divide yourself into two personalities. One that has erected that tower and is happy about it, but then also like a judge of that tower, something to contend with that tower. And as much as I can do that to myself, I also want other people to step in. And there's a difference between, criticizing the that portion of your personality that erected that tower, that manifest that idea, there's a difference between that and attacking the idea itself. And what I want is to be able to erect a tower that's as strong and as well built as I can, and then have others come in and try and attack that tower to destroy it as much as possible. And then whatever is left standing.
It's like, well, let's build it back better this time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And whatever's left standing, you know that like that has been tried. That is true. That's a well standing. It's on solid footing. And yeah, if there are people that come in and I hope that at some point we can get to a point where people are able to come in and attack the ideas and build on the ideas and discuss these ideas, not just for me, but also for people themselves. I think that, this exercise is not just a means to an end. Mm-hmm. It's an exercise in that it's working that critical thinking muscle where you're thinking through things and you're gathering a better understanding of the world.
Yeah. Another thing I'll say is that the types of ideas that we might talk about is, sometimes maybe it's deep philosophical or theological ideas, right?
Yes.
But sometimes it's fun to just talk about, I don't know, bar soap, right?
Yeah.
Like, let's talk about granola bars. I don't know. Let's talk about whatever. Honestly,
let's think critically about everything.
There's so many interesting things to talk about, and I think you can find just about anything interesting. Like broad you, but also like you. Like you can find anything interesting. And yeah, so I think the idea is this can be a place to talk about anything and everything. I think you don't want this to be just you talking about things. Like you want to be able to interact.
I want to engage with people.
You want to be able to interact with people and with ideas.
Specifically, I want to address ideas themselves. I don't care to discuss character attacks. I don't care who said what. I care about the idea specifically. And in any productive discussion, there are certain fundamental agreed upon rules that are abided by all parties. And, oftentimes these are unsaid, but when you're having a discussion with someone, everyone knows that there's, some nuclear option that could be exercised at any given point in time, something where you can just end a conversation on a moment's notice. You could say something horrible. You can be an absolute jerk to someone. So I think for some of the discussion that we're going to have, we'll I think be working on some structure, but I've written out some rules here. I want to talk through some of that background for them, I think.
These apply to, us as much as, if not more, right? They're kind of rules for ourselves. Here and how we want to think about it, but then also extend it out to just general rules that we think are helpful for aiding productive conversation.
Yeah,
I think that's kind of what they are.
Yeah, really, like, good creativity and discussion requires some level of restriction and guardrails to it. Structure is necessary for, kids when they're growing up. Kids crave that structure so that they can explore within and work and test those boundaries. But having that structure, while it may be in part imposing and feeling as if it's limiting, it's also in a way freeing, because when you operate within that structure, there is a level of safety. So part of what we're looking to do with these rules is keep that safety area that allows for critical thinking. And as we go through these, it'll become, I hope, self-evident that the rules are in place in an attempt to make sure that the thinking and the discussion that's being held is in good faith.
Sure.
Is productive.
So, all right. So tell me, what are these rules?
Sure. So one of the first things is I only want to talk about things that are somewhat timeless. Obviously topical things can I'm not afraid to address those. But I think too often people get their heads down and they fail to see the forest and are just looking at those trees. So I think that, day-to-day things can be representative of something larger, obviously, but let's focus on that larger thing where actions can actually be taken. That'll allow people, to look back at previous things, to engage with those. I'm not afraid to go back to some of the first episodes and readdress things and refine things. I'm sure that there are going to be plenty of times where I'm wrong, where I've said something and needed to go back on it. But yeah, I don't want to be talking about something that's irrelevant in a week, a month, a year, something like that. So, all right, next up, number 2. I am only going to promote things that I believe in, period. I see people all the time shilling products and selling out reputations to just make a quick buck. I'm not willing to damage reputation to make money. I'm not willing to sacrifice reputation just on a principled basis. There are plenty of things that I really like and would be open to talking about by name or something like that, but I'm not going to talk about things that I don't believe in from minute 1, period. No questions about it. So, next up, number 3, no profanity. If there is profanity, we'll censor that out. I want people to be able to listen to stuff with their kids in the car. I think that excessive swearing kind of can detract from a message, and as such, want to stay away from that. There are other ways to express most ideas beyond swearing. Some jokes are only funny if you're swearing, but we'll refrain from those on this show. All right, now we'll kind of move into some of the more discussion-based things. So the first one, Rule 4, titled "Leave the Door Open." This is kind of trying to be an all-encompassing thing. Things are rarely completely and fully known, and quite often people get caught defending things that they said because they said them with just complete confidence. There was no room for dissent. Sometimes people don't want to be wrong, so then they're caught defending those things. I'm completely fine with being wrong at some point in the future. So the door is always open for dissent. I'll try and do my best to admit when I'm wrong and make whatever necessary corrections. But yeah, part of this is leaving the door open for other interpretations or perspectives. The goal here is to talk and to learn, not just to espouse a given viewpoint. So leaving that door open is necessary. Obi-Wan says to Anakin, only a Sith deals in absolutes. So we're not trying to be Sith Lords here. For all my Star Wars nerds out there.
Clearly, I was just going to say, we are trying to be Star Wars nerds.
Yeah. And I think for people engaged in discussions like this, it takes a degree of courage to embrace, some of the nuances of conversation rather than just defaulting to taking a given side. Taking one side or another just all the way down the line is an easy thing to do, but dissenting from that and kind of paving your own way is something that requires critical thinking, which is what we're trying to do here. So, all right, number 5, everything stays up. Things are not to be deleted to hide past opinions or takes. It's relatively simple, but we're not going to be pulling down episodes, redacting things, stuff like that. I believe people can change. I know that I'll change. Part of changing is allowing your past self to die, and past things that I've said or posted aren't set in stone. Everything can be changed. It evolves over time. If I have new thoughts on something, I'll try and post those. Removing things from the past, though, it feels like you're trying to doctor a specific view of oneself. Like I'm perfect or something. That's obviously not the case. The goal here is to grow, to become better, to think deeper. And recognition of past mistakes and allowing those to die off in your mind, I think is really the path forward, not to hide things. So. Number 6, benefit of the doubt will be given. It seems simple enough, but I imagine going forward it's gonna be difficult in practice. Too often, I think people assume the worst and then end up being wrong. As a result, I want to do my best to have nuance and kind of assume the best, provided data doesn't say otherwise. Kind of goes along with like Hanlon's razor. That says, never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. So benefit of the doubt will be given. Next up, Rule 7. Complaints or criticisms will be accompanied with solutions. I really don't like it when people act as if something is stupid without providing a better solution. I think people oftentimes do this because they don't have a better solution or don't want to be criticized with the same vigor as they criticize others. Ultimately, when we're assessing options, people don't often correctly assess different risks. There's a lack of realization of positives that are currently benefited from oftentimes, and risks of a new model oftentimes aren't properly understood. This is summarized nicely, but somewhat simply with the phrase, grass is always greener on the other side. I want to provide a solution as well. I hope this stops me from, casting stones whilst living in a glass house, as the saying goes, or missing the plank in my own eye. All right. Next up, Rule 8. Multiple perspectives will be represented. I want to try and provide options and information. I don't want things I say to be taken as like gospel or something like that. Topics are complicated. I think it'll be infrequent for me to be able to outline all perspectives that could be represented, but I want to try and represent or discuss at least a couple each time, even if I'm providing some level of dissent on one or another. Right. Rule 9. I'm going to try my best to steel man arguments. I heard this phrase first from Eric Weinstein. I don't know if he came up with it, but I think it communicates the meaning pretty effectively. It's kind of the opposite of straw manning someone's argument, steel manning being the antithesis, where you're trying to strengthen your opponent's argument as much as possible so that you're actually contending with something. I need to strengthen arguments against me as much as my own to make sure mine hold up. We kind of talked earlier about building a tower or structure and then trying to tear that down as an idea and seeing what's left afterward. You could also think of whatever's left standing should continue on. Whatever's not consumed by fire is strong enough, and the only way to figure out what's strong is to set the tower ablaze. This somewhat leads me to the next rule, which is Rule 10. Ideas and actions are to be the subject to be criticized, not people. We're kind of talking about this earlier. But I want people to criticize my ideas, not me. I want my ideas to be separate from me. If they're good, then they're good, independent of who I am. If they're bad, then they're bad, independent of who I am. I want to try my best to extend the same hand to other people. Know that I want people to viciously attack my ideas to see what they're truly made of. And I want to do the same to other people's. I think this is how discourse, is supposed to take place, where we're talking about ideas and not resorting to like character attacks or something like that. This is how we really get to the bottom of the things, in my opinion, how we get to the truth. When people are able to kind of divide themselves, like I was talking about earlier, from their ideas, then we're able to really, truly change, adapt, and learn to grow as people. When they're not able to do this, when they're not able to separate those two, people can pretty quickly become hurt, emotional, and that ultimately results in a failure to learn, I think. I believe that sometimes, this can be a marker of immaturity, and something that I often see in discourse nowadays, where people are unable to separate who they are as a person, their worth as a person from the ideas that they have. So if you criticize someone's idea, it feels like people say it feels like you're attacking them. So I want to focus on criticizing an idea, not a person, and I want people to do that with me.
And there are kind of like two sides of that too, right? Because there's the don't attack a person for what their idea is.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also the thing of don't think that your idea has special worth because of who you are.
Yeah,
appeal to
true.
Authority.
That's
right?
true. Yeah.
So it's like in both directions they should be separate.
Yeah. We were talking about kind of the state of modern discourse. Something else that I see a lot of is not listening. So Rule 11 is listen to understand. I watch people in discussions, whether that be in person or online now, post-COVID, that they think they're listening and they're not actually. They're listening with their ears, but not with their minds. They're not thinking about what others are saying. They listen just so that they can speak next, not so that they can actually learn. As a result, they really fail to explore new ideas. They fail to learn. They fail to grow. I don't want to pass up on opportunities to learn, to grow. So I'm going to try my best to listen, to understand, and not to just refute a point or to say what I want to say. Next up, Rule 12. Criticize yourself more than others. Set your house in order before criticizing the world. This kind of comes from some of Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, but I want my ideas to be well vetted and strong. So I'm going to do my very best to criticize them, to highlight their deficiencies, and to be even more rough on mine than other people's ideas. I think this is only fair if I want to criticize other people's ideas. I'm going to try my best to set my own house in perfect order before I criticize the world, as Jordan Peterson suggests, or take the plank out of my own eye before looking at the speck in my brother's, as Jesus says. In a similar biblical vein, also cited by Jordan Peterson, I'll try my best to tell the truth, or at least don't lie, which is the next rule. I think ultimately lies are used to deceive and almost always have nefarious intent. People don't lie when they're trying to truly learn. People don't lie when they're trying to engage in the types of discussions that we're looking to here. So I want to not do that on this podcast so that we can maximize the communication that we've got and as a result, the learning that takes place here. All right, next up, Rule 14, be precise in your speech. Another one kind of similar to 12 Rules for Life. I always reference this with my wife. I say precision of language, Jonas, referencing the book The Giver. I think people often keep their language vague so that they can keep things ambiguous, as they're afraid of failure or being wrong. If they're precise with things that they said, then they can be attacked, or God forbid, they could be wrong. It could be called out in front of others. I'm not afraid to be wrong, and I want to be as clear as possible about what I'm saying. So I'm going to try my best to be precise in my speech. When quoting The Giver, I know that the actual instance where this is said is often in relation to love and other things that aren't really experienced by the neutral and dull people described in The Giver. But I do think that the sentiment of being clear in what you're talking about is one positive of their society, even if it's a little perversely applied. All right, next up, Rule 15, give credit as best as possible. I think you've heard me reference a few times, different people, whether that's biblical verses or places where I've gotten ideas. I don't want to sit here and act as if every single idea that I'm discussing is one unique to my own. I try my best to build upon things, to fully explore them, to figure out what it is that I agree with versus what I don't agree with. So I'm not just going to reiterate what somebody else has said and not bring anything unique to the table. I'm going to try my best to really incorporate different things, but also build upon them myself. And I don't want people to think that something's wildly unique if it's not. I'm going to try my best to provide like links or references or citations for things where I'm building off of something, because I think that giving credit to people for their ideas is something really critical. Last up, Rule 16, talk about things that are helpful and have utility and state that utility. So I'm going to do my very best, because when I listen to things, I don't want to be just having discussions for discussion's sake. I want to actually be talking about things that matter to people, have some bearing on reality. I'm going to try and make some of those things more clear. Oftentimes it's going to be a discussion to explore new modes of being, of thinking, and to highlight the importance of really analyzing the things more deeply, whether that's a bar of soap or a granola bar, or something more deep, more philosophical or theological. All right, so those are some of the rules that we wrote up and some of the rationale behind them. Just as kind of a closer, this is a podcast because I'm comfortable speaking. To be honest, I'm not a great writer, but I do take solace in that for most of humanity's history, humans evolved to communicate verbally, not necessarily via writing. Writing, was only invented, maybe a few thousand years ago and was brought to the masses on a large scale in the past couple hundred years with things like the printing press, the internet, mass education. Most people throughout the course of human history didn't have the ability like we do to read and write. And I've always thought podcasts, video recordings, things like that are some of the most interesting forms of communication. So that's kind of where the idea of this medium came from. I talked earlier about wanting to have this be a conversation, so we're going to get an email set up and detail that in the description of these podcast episodes. If you want to respond to something, feel free to record, an audio recording, a voice memo of something, and send it on in. We may play some of that on the podcast. We may outline some of it. We may play all of it, but we want to have a discussion here, and I think that the best way to have that discussion is via audio, via verbals, and really going with what we're evolved for, what our ancestors have been doing since the beginning of time, conversing, and want to see how this platform kind of evolves. I think too often people can lose emotion when things are just behind a screen, when you're just seeing text, letters on a screen. We forget that that's a person. I think, maybe a step in the right direction is being able to hear someone's voice and contend with it in that fashion. So with that, thank you all, and we hope to hear from you in the future. Have a good night.